Right, let me kick off with my talk then, which is what's the snag with defects? There is a typo on the first slide. Anybody? Richard? Defects? Capital D. Wasn't a typo, it was deliberate, but I did just think that as I saw it myself there. So, let me, we are all geeks, aren't we, together? Let me take you through then my talk. So firstly, what is the snag? Is there even a snag? Then we'll look at sort of more traditional approaches to managing defects and quality in construction contracts versus how the NEC is intended to operate. Then we'll do a deep dive into what the NEC 4 construction contract states on these subjects. And finally, hopefully, I'll offer some good practice in terms of what I think good looks like for how industry should approach managing these areas of the contract. Before I kick off then, Ben, in his talk said that we're really good at managing quality, health, safety, environmental records, which I don't disagree with. But what I'm interested to know is, who thinks if we're good at managing quality in construction generally, whether you're a contractor, whether you work in the client team or whoever, do you think we're good at managing quality in construction? So raise your hands if you think we are. Oh, wow. I did think there'd be a more positive response to that. In which case, I can imagine the response to my second question will be similar in terms of who thinks we're good at managing defects within NEC contracts. Again, very low response rate and a couple on the fences as well. So that's interesting, but at least it gives me the reason to speak this afternoon, I guess. If you'd all said you thought you were brilliant, then I'd have just packed up and gone home. So, what is the snag? I can still do that if it's preferred. What is the snag? Okay, so my contention is this. And speaking as somebody who does an awful lot of training and workshops in NEC contracts, when you reflect on how much time we spend talking about early warning and program and compensation events and beating the drum about those subjects compared to how much time we talk about managing quality, it's actually pretty disproportionate. Now, that is a potential issue. It's a fairly small area of the contract, but it's of vital importance because obviously, NEC contracts all about managing time, cost, and quality. And if we manage all three things well, we will get to the end without a problem. Yeah? That's the idea. So I think we don't put as much resource either in our training sessions or workshops or on our projects into managing them proactively as they could be. And hopefully what I'll do later is take you through some of the tools we have in the contract to help us do it better. So, is there a problem? I think we've just justified that there is, but if you don't believe yourselves or myself, then maybe look at Egan, who in 1998 suggested that 30% of construction is rework. That's a long time ago, so surely we've got better since then, haven't we? Oh dear. The Get It Right initiative in 2019 said the cost of avoidable errors are approximately £5 billion. And then we talk about low margins. Maybe if we got better at managing quality, it would help to improve our margins. Also, you've seen evidence from the same Construction Law and Adjudication Society's report earlier today, and you will find that defects, whilst not the main cause of disputes, they are certainly a significant cause of disputes. So it is telling us that maybe this is something we need to get better at. You can see that that's from previous reports, and it is showing some improvement, but in terms of rankings, still similar in terms of the overall percentage of them. Going back to the Getting Right Initiative's report, Strategy for Change, published in 2019. There you go, a bit of a breakdown. What can you take from that? 21% of costs are due to error. Yeah, 79% not due to error, the rest of it all down to error. So it's telling us there's more work we can do. Okay? So, This isn't a new problem, though. Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers, came up with a nice quote: "The bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten." And again, we've heard this morning about the issues that the race to the bottom causes for people. And from what I see, whilst client organizations may have got better over the years at awarding contracts on most economically advantageous in terms of UK public sector contracts, which means it's a combination of price and quality, I'm not sure how much of that goes on in the supply chain. So when contractors are awarding subcontracts, is it purely about price? Or do we do any kind of quality evaluation in there? So there's the issue. Let's just move on a little bit then to look at how traditional contracts compared with NEC. So what is the problem that NEC was trying to solve? Was to sum it up, the sort it out at the end problem. So you can see this is based on the ICE 7th, but most traditional forms of contract work in exactly the same way, where we have the term substantial completion, or in other contracts, practical completion, but it is not defined, and therefore the thing that people argue about, okay? Where we have differing expectations over what practical or substantial means when we get to the end. Then we have the engineer's representative, who's responsible for watching and supervising construction. It is common that we have a clerk of works, but they have no contractual powers. Okay? So the clerk of works is there, but cannot actually enforce any part of the contract. It would all have to be done via the engineer's representative. Even the employer's representative has limited powers to issue instructions and carry out inspections in the contract as well. And no power to notify defects, which also are not a defined term in the contract as well. So you can see that we have a problem, and what this leads to is the creation of the long list at the end. The snagging list, yeah? Which is unmanageable. And then the long list is generated. We have a bit of a tussle over which ones are important and which ones are less important. Begrudgingly, the client accepts the works, the substantial completion certificate gets issued, and then that's it for the next year. And hopefully, fingers crossed, over the next year, that list diminishes so that at the end, the defects correction certificate can be issued, yeah? So not proactive, completely reactive, lots of issues with how subjective it is. So, okay, and yes, it uses the term as soon as practicable in terms of how long defects are corrected, which again is subjective, isn't it? So traditional approach, misaligned expectations over what substantial completion looks like or even means. And in order to understand what it means, you do have to go into case law, which isn't very instructive for those people on site having to make these decisions. And it gets delayed at the 11th hour. So we all think we know when it's going to be finished. The contractor's program might have told us when they think it's going to be finished, but the contractor's idea of finishing is different from the client's idea of finishing. And suddenly at the 11th hour, a delay to substantial completion is announced, and everybody goes into a tailspin. Okay? Not good for anybody. So yeah, as you can see, quality not managed proactively whilst the works are under construction. You get the long unmanageable lists emerging. And yeah, hopefully we get to the defect certificate or correction of defect certificate with as few problems left, but it is a fingers crossed kind of exercise. And all of this leads to trust being eroded. It leads to confrontation, leads to stress, and potentially can lead us into dispute as well. So NEC was supposed to help us solve all these problems. The defect is defined. It takes us away from the subjectivity. So we've got an objective test to apply to decide whether completion has been achieved. Defects are notified by either party, either by the supervisor or the contractor. We've got this dedicated role of supervisor with lots of defined powers to watch tests done by the contractor, to carry out their own tests and inspections, to instruct searchers for defects and to notify defects as well. And also responsible for issuing a defect certificate ultimately. So the NEC was supposed to be a much more proactive approach. I'm not going into the nuts and bolts of the process at this stage of things. I'll do a little bit more of that later, but I'm assuming everybody has a basic understanding of it. Okay? So, as I said, NEC was supposed to solve these problems, but I wonder if it has, and our little straw poll at the start indicates that maybe it hasn't. So, reasons for denying the existence of defects or excuses. So, let's see how many people recognize some of these statements, shall we? You can't notify defects until completion. One heard from contractors. Yeah? I'll correct the defects after completion. I don't agree that it's a defect. It's not a defect. It's incomplete work. It's not a defect. I'm gonna fix it. It is. It's not a defect. It's only a snag. My personal favourite. And contractors, you should write this down. Client team, you should also write it down so you know when it happens to you what's going on. It's not a defect, it's a temporary disconformity. That's wonderful. I'll leave you with that. Hopefully you all recognize that little gif there. So let's get into some more detail about what the NEC states. I said, not really going through the procedures, but we're looking at the words in detail. So, firstly, defect, correct, is a defined term. Part of the work is not in accordance with the scope, part of the work is designed by the contractor, not in accordance with law or the design which has been accepted. Okay? You should be familiar with that. What is a part of the works? That's what I wonder. Yeah? Every individual departure from the scope, no matter how small, is an individual defect and therefore should be notified individually. I'm not sure that's a part of the works, is it? And how do we manage that? We're going to create a lot of work, aren't we? Potentially. Surely a part is anything less than the whole. But does that lead us to the long list again? That's unmanageable. So, also, it's not in accordance with the scope. What if the scope isn't clear? Difficult to establish whether the works are in accordance with it or not, if the scope is ambiguous. Also, remember, this is the supervisor's domain in the contract. So the supervisor here has a dual requirement to monitor both. Do the works comply with the scope? And if there is design, do the works comply with the accepted design? Okay? So, absolute basics in terms of defect. Why is it important? Because we really need to think about that for when it comes to notifying defects. Well, how do we do this? You know, I have seen the long list. I had a project where there was 1,000 things in a spreadsheet. At the end, it emerged, you know, towards the end of the job, 1,000 individual things. It was a snagging list. These weren't notified defects. It was a snagging list. How do you manage that? And I think, you know, there are some ideas. If we put ourselves in the position of the contractor and think about how is the contractor going to rectify them or correct them, then maybe we'll create more meaningful defect notifications. So do we do it by area of the works? Yeah? Do we do it by subcontractor? Who made the defect? If you put yourself in the contractor's position for how are they going to manage it, then if the subcontractor's created the defect, then it will get sent off to the subcontractor to correct. So maybe, you know, thinking about these kind of things will mean that defects can be notified more effectively so that they can be managed better. Okay? Another important definition is completion. What does completion mean? It's when the contractor has done all the work which the scope states is to be done by the completion date. and created notified defects which prevent the client from using the works and others from doing their work. And then, if the work isn't stated in the scope, it's down to done all the work necessary for the client to use the works and others to do their work. Now, ideally, the scope would set this out, because that takes us away from subjectively interpreting the final paragraph to something that is concrete, where the client says, these works have to be done, these works don't have to be done. They could be done post-completion. So with a building project of mine, those works were the reinstatement of the car park that was where the contractor's welfare facilities were. Yeah? Couldn't be done until the welfare facilities had gone, which couldn't happen until we got the job over the line. However, the problem is, how long after completion does the contractor have to sort out that work? Yeah, if the client has said, we don't have to have this done before completion, so we can achieve completion, yeah, without that work being done, fine, there you get your completion certificate. That work isn't a defect, is it? Or is it? You've said it's not, because you've allowed me to do this. So when should it be sorted? At any point before the defect certificate is issued? Who knows? If the defects have not been notified, you see the word notified is important there, isn't it? Because the contract doesn't always refer to notified defects. Sometimes it just refers to defects without the verb notified before it. But here in this instance in completion, if it hasn't been notified, then it cannot be used to prevent completion being certified, which is what happened on my job with 1,000 snags in a list. Yeah? Wasn't a reason. This has not been notified formally in accordance with the contract. So that's important, isn't it? What does which would have prevented mean? Shouldn't it say which prevent? Does it create a situation where, even if the client is using the works, completion might not happen, might not be certified, if theoretically they can say a defect could have prevented them from, even though it didn't? Now, I'm fairly confident that is not the interpretation that was intended. However, it is an interpretation I've seen in use. Okay? So, some issues. So, let's look at quality then, and where that appears throughout the contract. Firstly, early warnings. Yeah? Do we give early warnings for quality issues? Anybody done that? Anybody see the hand up? Yeah, a few. Okay. All from client side? Any contractors giving an early warning about quality issues in their own work? Or just to subcontractors about their work? Yeah, I can see some acknowledgement from the... Yeah, okay. More on that later. Yeah, we should give early warnings for things that impact quality. Increased total other prices? Well, no, it's a defect. Well, okay, yeah, if it's a defect as a defined defect, it doesn't pass that test. Or if it's a defect in the client's design, the client's design needs to change because it's wrong. Well, that would be a compensation event, wouldn't it? So yeah, that could be a situation where that could happen. Delay completion. I think doing rework, having to go back and do it again, or finish it off, could do that, couldn't it? Same with delay meeting a key date. Clearly, the one that is entirely about quality is that one, which could be either of the situations I mentioned. It could be problems with the workmanship in the contractor's work, or it could be a problem with the client's design. Could all pass that test, couldn't they? And yeah, obviously there's the catch-all for any other matter which could increase contractors' total cost. Well, we've just seen how correcting defects could do that anyway, even if it's not a compensation event. So pretty much you could see how defects should be, or issues with quality, shall we say, should be notified as early warnings. What about the program? Does the program tell us anything about quality? What do we show on programs? Provisions for the procedures set out in the contract, such as tests and inspections required by the scope, maybe. What do you think? So yeah, It is telling us maybe that we should be showing quality on the program. What about revised programs? Do they say anything about quality? How the contractor plans to deal with any delays and to correct notified defects. Another show of hands. Anybody seen the correction of notified defects shown on a program? Better than before. Still quite low, but better than before, eh? Okay, that's good. That is better than I hoped for, actually. So you can clearly see that rework, correcting defects, could cause delays. Whether they've been notified or not, they could still cause delays. And if they've been notified, they definitely should be shown on the program. So I think we can see that, yeah, we can see how quality there. Now, this is about being proactive, isn't it? I've got a concern about quality, early warning. Okay, you've now got to go remedy an issue, whether it's just a bit of poor performance or whether it is a defect. Then we've got to manage that by putting it into the program and illustrate how it's impacting progress. Okay, so that's all good. Then we get to section 4 of the contract, which is about quality management, obviously. Firstly, the contractor provides a quality policy statement and plan for acceptance submitted to the... No, not submitted, provided for some curious reason, not submitted. It's the only place in the contract it says it. One for NEC 5, Rob. If any changes are made to the quality plan, the contractor provides the change quality plan for accept. Provides again, not submits. So, both the project manager and, I would hope, the supervisor understand the contractor's approach to quality, and then, which I think is why this clause was put in the contract, can monitor whether the contractor is complying with their own quality plan or not. And if not, clause 40.3 gives the PM the power to instruct the contractor to correct failures to comply. Okay, that's pretty good. But where's the supervisor gone in all this? What role does the supervisor have formally in the contract to monitor compliance with the quality plan or to do anything in relation to the quality plan? So I think this might be where some of the problems start, because the contract has an obligation to operate a system and to, once they've provided the plan, to stick to it. So they have their own quality systems that they're busy with in their own world, but the supervisor can't deal in that. They're over here in their world of tests, inspections, and defects, creating their own lists and things. And that's a problem, isn't it, when we get two versions of the truth, two different ways of dealing with it. Again, even, going back to the job where I had the 1,000 snags, it was quite a traditional approach. The contractor had their own list, and never the twain met. So everyone's looking at the list going, well, what is it? Where is it? I don't know where that one is. So much waste, so much inefficiency. Okay? Now, that's quite a traditional approach. I've seen much better ways of managing quality than that, which I'll come back onto. But the point here is that the contract does not actively require the supervisor to be involved with those processes. They're merely concerned with tests, inspections, and defects. So, and I do think the intent of clause 40.2, 40.3 was to avoid defects from happening. It's encouraging, forcing the project manager to be more proactive. And if we do that, and we say, oh, you're not complying with your quality plan, it might wake the contractor up, bring them back into line, and then a defect might not even happen. Okay? So, be interesting to know how effective that's been. What else? Well, obligation to inform each other of tests and inspections and afterwards of the results. Again, it's supposed to be proactive, but it does require coordination, cooperation, and planning between the contractor and the supervisor in order to make that work, doesn't it? But how often do you see that? Do you not just see that the contractor is in their own world doing their own tests and inspections, and the supervisor's over there in their own world doing it? And then we get the conflict, we get the disagreements about stuff, and also the uncertainty over, well, what even is the thing? Why have you come and done your test now? It's incomplete work, which it genuinely can be if you've got a very keen supervisor. Yeah. So unless the supervisor understands the contractor's program, unless they plan and coordinate their tests and inspections together, we'll get more problems, won't we? Clause 41.4, obligation to correct defects and testing inspections created. Now, the contract is silent in terms of how long the contractor has to correct these defects. However, based on the definition of completion, if the defect hasn't been completed by that stage, it may delay completion. It might prevent completion being certified, might it? So that even though there's no strict time scale for defects before completion to be corrected, because of that definition, that should encourage people to make sure they are corrected in flight, as people say. Obligation to notify defects as soon as they become aware. Dual obligation again this time, isn't it? Reciprocal. As soon as. Interesting words. We've seen them elsewhere. In early warnings. Yeah? Very good at early warning, aren't you? You can read the contract. You know there could be consequences if you haven't done it. So, yeah, you make sure you've done your early warnings. Same words used, different context. Contractors notifying supervisors of defects. Anybody want to put your hand up? Oh, that is expected. One. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, same words, different context, different interpretation. Okay. Okay, so yeah, we can conclude that yes, to do away with the thought that you can't notify defects till completion. Of course you can. The words take you there, and they should be notified and can be notified at any time before completion. But hang on a second. If we're not careful here, the overzealous supervisor again could turn up on day one and issue a defect notice. Yeah? It's not in accordance with the scope. Give me a chance. I've barely started. So that's a bit too keen, but you can see how either extreme is wrong there. So there must be some sensible way of managing these in between the 2 points. Again, we'll come back onto that. Contractor corrects a defect whether or not the supervisor had notified it. So the contractor should not just rely on supervisor's notification, yeah? Again, I have seen this, I've observed this, where the contractor goes up to the supervisor and says, oh, have you got my list? And then they've got into this pattern of behavior where the supervisor says, oh yeah, there's the list. And the contractor goes, oh, thank you very much. And they only fix the things in the list. That is not what the contract requires, is it? Okay. And it is interesting because most contractors have ISO accreditations for quality, yeah? Which require you to be proactively managing quality. Yeah, you have your quality systems, you have your quality plan in place, quality policy statement, all of this stuff. So again, we should be doing this regardless of the fact that NEC contract requires it, because we've told everybody and we've got a certificate that says we do it. Interesting. So, how am I doing for time, Blair? Excellent. Better than last year. Okay, so good practice. We've had a few clues, I think, along the way of what I think good practice means. Okay, now I can't operate this, Glenn. So, proactively managing quality. So, firstly, we've seen the quality plan. Submitted, accepted, and then monitored. That's the important bit, isn't it? Monitoring compliance, and then being proactive when we see non-compliances, non-conformances, to actually get those sorted out. And if we do that, we might avoid defects. So yeah, the process is quite straightforward, isn't it? So we've seen that. So that's one tool that we've got to help us. What else have we got? Well, again, we've seen early warnings. So early warnings notified, improvements managed through early warning meetings. Yeah? Again, proactive. Not just the reactive, retrospective, you've done it wrong, you better fix it, it's a defect. It's trying to be more proactive, I think, is what's required. So, again, discuss and manage. So to bring this back together now, this only occurred to me at the weekend. Systems thinking, but interestingly, I heard it discussed on several occasions yesterday. So it's clearly not something that's completely gone from people's minds, because systems thinking is approach that, the seminal book on the subject is The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, published in 1990, I think it was. So it's been around, 35 years? Hence why I assume nobody remembered what it was anymore, but reassuring to know that people are still talking about it. Thinking as a discipline for seeing wholes, a framework for seeing interrelationships rather than things, for seeing patterns of change rather than snapshots. Okay? So when I look at an NEC contract, I see a system of tools that we have to manage things. We've got the proactive things, and then we've got the reactive things for when that hasn't worked. Okay? So if you apply that to the management of quality, okay? Oh, before I get on to that, by the way, the APM have not forgotten about it either, John. Okay, so still current on the APM website, talking about a systems approach, a systems thinking approach that, if applied, could reduce the need for replanning work and rework, optimizing risk margins, allowing projects to fill their objectives both on time and to budget. This is what it's all about, isn't it? Stay in control of time, cost, and quality. So it tells us to take a more holistic view of this subject, okay, than what necessarily people are doing in industry. So this is how I think it could work. This is what I think is good practice. Okay, that we have a tiered approach to managing quality. Okay? Starts with the proactive, ends up being reactive. So yeah, and obviously progressive escalation through those steps in the contract. So firstly, project manager monitors contractor compliance with quality plan, failures to comply. Okay? That's good. Now, then non-conformance reporting. Obviously, the supervisor isn't directly involved in the contractor's quality system or quality plan, but if it is being used, and I've seen great systems being used to do this, why wouldn't the supervisor want to engage with the system? As in directly input into the system, rather than doing their own thing over there and the contractor doing their own thing over there, and then two versions of the truth emerging. So I've seen contractors hand over an iPad to the supervisor and say, there's our quality system, use it, please. Yeah? And, supervisors are a bit more enlightened, I think, do like that approach. They can go around the site, they can take a picture, it's geo-tagged so we know exactly where it is. Some of the systems allow them to mark it on the actual drawing. Yeah? This is smart, isn't it? This is efficient. This is, as Ben was talking about this morning, this is about the use of technology to make us more efficient. So why wouldn't we be doing this? Okay? So that, I think, is a good idea, but not one I see used regularly enough, in my opinion. Then, any issues that aren't resolved in that way are escalated into the early warning. So you're starting to see a buildup of non-conformances, and it could be on the same theme. There's a workmanship issue in this particular element of the works. Yeah, or it's the same person who's making the problem. So we escalate it into early warning, manage it through the early warning procedure. Okay? Ultimately, if that doesn't work, then yeah, escalate it again, notify it as a defect. Okay? Then, and the words are important again, aren't they? Defects are notified. So the contractors who say, well, I don't agree it's a defect, well, you're not being asked a question. You're not being asked to agree to it. You're being told. That's what a notice is. You're being told it's a defect. So when I train supervisors, I say, I prefer the approach here that you say to the contractors, it's a defect until you say it's not a defect. Yeah? And if you don't agree with it, well, it'll go away at some point if it really isn't a defect. Okay? So that's what I think good could look like to people. And if we do that, hopefully we'll get to the end with fewer problems, okay? And I know a few years ago, there was a lot of excitement in industry about something called soft landings. Have we all forgotten about that? Has that gone away? Because I don't really hear people talking about it anymore. But that is a soft landing, isn't it? We get to the end, and from a quality point of view, we've got a good quality product at that point in time, rather than a car crash. Okay? What does crashing into completion look like? One party, the contractor, desperate to get it over the line. Why? They fear the damages being deducted, don't they? Also, they want to get the resource off, they want to move it on to the next job. And in the contractor's mind, they have an idea of what completion looks like. But that can be very different to the client's idea and the client team's idea. So the car crash is where the contractor in the program, again, has been saying, this is planned completion, this is when I think I'm going to be finished. And we get within eyesight of it, and suddenly we realize there's a problem. Okay? Again, I had this on a project a few years ago. We were 2 weeks away from planned completion. The client team have lost confidence in the contractor. The 1,000 things in the spreadsheet was a reason, but also if you poked your head outside the site cabins, the car park was devoid of white vans. There's almost tumbleweed blowing past. When you walked around the building, not a lot of activity going on. And yet we're supposed to be 2 weeks away from completion. Heated discussions, as I like to say, you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelette. Heated discussions led to eventually the admission that they were 6 weeks late, i.e. 8 weeks from the point we were at. Nobody should want that to happen. It really damaged that contractor's reputation. Guess what? They didn't get any more work out of that client for a very long time and had to work very hard to repair that relationship. Okay? So that was not a soft landing. That's the car crash that I'm describing. So not good for anybody. So how to avoid that from happening? In the run-up to completion, define for yourselves how long that is. It will depend on the size and scale of your project. But ensure testing inspections are completed and any defects are notified. Okay? Check the scope requirements for work that has to be done by the completion date. And make sure we all understand that. If there aren't any requirements, talk about what it looks like. Talk about what the contract says. What does that physically look like? Okay? In terms of the extent of work that does need to be finished, but what can we allow to be finished afterwards? Then also talk about the defects and discuss which ones would prevent the client from using the works so that they can be planned in. Finally, ensure that this is all agreed between both the project manager, because the project manager is responsible for certifying completion, the supervisor, because they're the one issuing the defects and monitoring those, and the contractor as well. Okay? So hopefully that's resonated with you. Hopefully you see that as a good idea or a good approach to managing defects better. So thank you very much.